So what is socialism? Socialism is the political economic system where the state owns the means of production, where it controls, primarily through ownership. And that's kind of the subtle difference between socialism and fascism. In socialism, the state owns the means of production. Under fascism, they control it through regulations. So, but they're very similar. Both are forms of real statism, where the state manages the economy. The state controls the economy. It tells people how much they can make. It redistributes wealth on a massive scale, and it regulates and controls what gets produced and at what prices it gets produced. And, you know, this country is clearly drifting towards socialism, that it is drifting away from a system where the government has no involvement in the economy and leaves the economy, the distribution of wealth, the creation of wealth, the, you know, prices, what products get made, all of those issues leaves them to individual choices, voluntary choices in individuals. And we're moving slowly over the last 100 years to a system where the government controls all of these aspects. We're still, I think, a long way in the United States from out and out socialism, where the government controls all of them, but we're on that slippery slope, and we're clearly heading in that direction, and very little that our politicians seem to be doing or have done in the last 100 years, even the better ones, seems to slow down the slide down this slippery slope.
Even now, I'm hearing, you know, Bernie will say, you know, he talked to that guy at the town hall,
yeah,
and the guy said, I earned $41,000 a year, and Bernie admitted, your taxes will go up, and then he explains, well, the health costs are going to go down, or whatever, which may or may not.
Makes no sense. He says, I'm going to tax you $5,000, and you're going to get $10,000 back in medical service. What magical box did you make that happen in? Are there doctors in the back room there?
Well, that's funny, when he said that, I was thinking, well, if you're healthy,
if the government's that good at things, honestly, I wish leftist solutions work, because they're the easiest solutions in the world, right? It's a recession. Tax everybody at 100%, redistribute the wealth, in 2 days the recession's over.
Yeah.
They don't work. They're crap. By the way, they're also immoral.
The thing I hate the most from the right is this constant refrain. Yeah, socialism, it's a great idea if only it worked. It's not true. It's an unbelievably morally shitty idea. The reason is this. The basic premise of socialism is, I'm here, I'm breathing, give me crap. Right? You have an obligation to care for me. I have a right to health care. I can force that doctor to go to medical school, expend $200,000, spend her entire life learning medicine, and then I can walk into her house and force her to provide me medicine. Right? Capitalism, by nature, is the opposite. Capitalism is the idea that I will starve unless I give you a good or service that you want. Right? If I don't give you something that you want, I'm not going to eat tonight. It's forced altruism, effectively. Right? We have to have a trade. We have to come to some sort of consensus. I have to give you something cool, and you have to give me something cool. Right? It's great. Socialism is rape, and capitalism is consensual sex.
When you walk into the theater,
if the government doesn't restrain corporate power or the power of the rich, what prevents us from sliding into an autocracy or a plutocracy? What prevents us from becoming essentially a kingdom? If the government can't restrain that kind of power, who can?
Well, they can't. They shouldn't be able to. And what stops us sliding into those is competition. The fact is that you don't get autocracies or plutocracies.
Backing away
the only way we get autocracies and plutocracies is what we have today, which is the corporatism, the crony capitalism that we have today, when corporations and governments are like this.
Yaron, you know as well as I do that what has destroyed competition is monopoly in this country.
Monopoly granted by government, not created by the market.
Government did not say
Who is the monopolist? I want to know who the evil monopolist is out there. Because Rockefeller, who had 90% of all oil production in the United States, when he was around, prices dropped, quality went up.
Rockefeller was aggressively putting his competitors out of business by cutting side deals with the railroads to not carry their...
Wonderful! And what did
He was anti-competitive.
That was wonderful.
The imperative of monopoly is to destroy competition.
No, the imperative of monopolies, as taught in economics class, is that prices go up and quality goes down. Didn't happen, and within a decade, his share went from 90% to 60%, would decline further because competition was alive and well, and it had nothing to do with antitrust.
And how many large oil companies are based in the United States right now?
A number of them. I don't know the number. Two.
ExxonMobil and
but
somebody else.
But there's no freedom of compete today in the oil business, which is heavily regulated by government, is controlled by government, and therefore provides an incentive to become big and not real competition.
I debate socialists all the time, and their only real comeback is, oh, that's not real socialism, or that's not real communism. Is there any way to really get around that and try to make them see that look, just because your version of socialism, that magical fantasyland version of socialism, has not been tried, doesn't mean that socialism is an acceptable concept.
Yes. So the problem is that you're arguing with them in terms of the effectiveness of socialism. So what that argument is, you say socialism doesn't work, it fails everywhere, it makes people poor and miserable, right? That's the argument. And then they go, but that's because it hasn't been properly tried, right? That's their comeback. So here is the actual argument that works with socialism. It is immoral to steal from people even if you vote to steal from people. Okay, if there are 3 people in a room, and it's me, and I have $100, and you and your friend are in the room, and you vote to beat me up and take my money, that does not make it morally legitimate for you to beat me up and take my money. One of the great lies that's been told about socialism, and you see this all the time, is people say socialism, beautiful idea in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. No, socialism is a shitty idea in theory, and it's an immoral idea in practice. Okay? Socialism violates at least 3 of the basic 10 commandments for those who still care. It makes government into God. It suggests that you can steal from people if you vote for it. And it says that it is good to be covetous of your neighbor's ass. Right? For Bill Clinton, it has a different meaning. But the problem for conservatives is we never actually argue on a moral level. We're constantly arguing on an effective level, on an efficiency level. And that's a problem because the left always argues on the moral level. In the end, they always say, sure, my ideas don't work, but they're fair. They're fair, right? And so what you have to say, the only way to come back to that from that is to say, no, your ideas are not fair, your ideas are theft. Your ideas are theft. You don't get to steal from other people just because you want their stuff. That's the only way to beat that argument, do it on the moral level. Otherwise, they can always argue, well, it's not perfect, it's not perfect. Okay, there's no way to come back from that because, again, they're operating in unicorn land with gumdrop rainbows and fairy skies.
Why is it immoral? It's immoral because it violates individual rights, or more fundamentally, because it's anti-human life. It's anti-life. So it's wrong. It's immoral for the government to take money from some people and give it to others. You know, assuming that the people who it's taking it from made it and created it. And we would argue that wealth is actually created. People work hard for the money that they make. Money is just a reflection. It's just a tool, you know, expressing the value of the labor or the thoughts or the innovation that you've introduced into the marketplace. And when you create that wealth, when you've made that money and it's yours, nobody has a right to pull out a gun and take it from you and give it to somebody else. And you know, once you start doing that, you destroy all the life-giving aspects of a healthy economy. You destroy innovation and creativity and hard work and people really trying because it's not theirs. You know, it gets taken away, forces being used on them. Now that's just the redistribution of wealth. Now think about what happens when the government decides which innovations to support and which innovations not to support, what's good and what's bad, what consumers should buy, what consumers shouldn't buy. It's basically putting a gun to everybody in the economy and telling them what they should and shouldn't do, how they should and shouldn't behave. And that just destroys people's passion for life because they're not following their own values. It destroys their ability to think about what they really want in life, and it destroys their ability, their conceptual ability to innovate because they're not allowed to think about certain portions, so they can't really think. If whole segments of reality you are told by some government bureaucrat are out of bounds for you, you can't think. Thinking is taking in all the relevant facts. It's not taking the facts that some government bureaucrat told you are relevant, all the relevant facts, and then coming to a decision about what's right and what's wrong, or what works and what doesn't work, or what's efficient or inefficient.
Right? Lack of my $100,000 salary, that's because society is mean, and so we have to transform the society. And that's why young people, again, 40% back speech codes in American life. This is why I think the last poll was nearing or over 40% of young people are okay with socialism, like the actual socialism, because they don't know anything. They've been taught stupidity, and how they feel is all that matters. I mean, there's a video that's going around the internet getting all sorts of play about income inequality. Income inequality is the stupidest issue. Income inequality means nothing, right? I mean, I have a lot of income inequality with Bill Gates, but I'm doing pretty well, and I don't care that Bill Gates is doing really well. The only thing we should all care about is that there are poor people. We should figure out how poor people can do better, not how to make Bill Gates less rich. But this video is going around and saying, here's a poll of what Americans think the wealth distribution should look like,
and here is what the wealth distribution actually looks like. And I watched this video in bewilderment, and young people love it. And I watched this video in bewilderment saying, who told you that you get to tell the universe how wealth is distributed? Right? Who told you that you have a moral say as to how wealth is distributed? It's immoral, it's evil, it's wrong. You're going to have to steal people's labor from them. But people are not told this, and so they think that their own subjective vision of what reality should look like should govern what reality actually looks like, and it's only later, after 80 years of communist failure, that they realize, oh, that, and hundreds of millions of people dead, that they realize, oh, that was a bad idea.
Absolutely.
What's more important, capitalism or democracy?
Oh, capitalism is freedom. Democracy is mob rule. Democracy, properly understood, majority rule, is what we had in Athens when Socrates was corrupting the youth. The Athenians all voted, 51%, to have him killed, off with his head. Oh, in this case, he drank poison. Yeah. So majority rule is not what this country is about. This country is a constitutional republic built on the idea that the government does one thing and one thing only, does it really well. I'm all for government. It protects individual rights and leaves the marketplace and our voluntary choices to everything else.
So you're suggesting that we, the people, do not have the right to band together and create an institution to promote our general welfare?
I'm saying that we don't have a right to violate the minority, and the smallest minority, the only minority that's really important, is the individual. We don't have the right to violate the rights of one individual in order to benefit other people.
What happened to majority rule elections?
Majority rule elections is not the idea behind this country.
Then why did the founders write that into the Constitution?
The founders wrote that into the Constitution to elect the people who then, our congressmen and our senators,
the majority of the people,
who are there to protect the rights of the individuals.
But
that's it.
It's not just the rights of the individual.
Why do we have? Let me ask you this.
Three different places in the Constitution it mentions the general welfare. You're saying that we're not allowed to organize ourselves as government to protect the general welfare?
We can go into constitutional analysis, but the general welfare back then did not mean what it is meant today, and you know that. But let's
no, it did actually. You know who the first president was.
Let's give an example.
To propose and pass legislation to care for the poor in Washington D.C. and feed them and provide them with medical services. It was George Washington.
And it's good for the other founders who stopped them at that point. But
no,
let's take an example. The example is this. Let's say it is deemed not in the general welfare to let Yaron Brook speak or to let Tom Hartman speak. That is, that our speech is hurting the general welfare. Does a majority of Americans have a right to vote us silent? And according to democracy, yes, they do. And I would argue that we have an inalienable right, as is written in the Declaration, to our speech.
Historically, they have. You're right. And for example, the Alien and Sedition Acts under both John Adams and President Wilson.
Horrible.
They were horrible things.
Horrible.
You're right.
Absolutely.
And they were examples of the misuse of majority rule. However,
that's not a misuse of majority rule. That is a majority rule. 51% of the people.
Either it's a distinction without a difference. Or a difference without a distinction. The reality, though, is that in both cases, eventually we reverted back to the Constitution, which said that your right to free speech is inalienable, or at least moderately inalienable. You can't yell fire in a free
but that's a whole different issue. That's an issue of property rights, not of free speech. Different discussion.
The reality of the situation is that the economy grows because people engage in consensual transactions, and people invent new things in order to engage in more of those consensual transactions. That's not an impoverishing thing. The truth is that socialism is the most selfish philosophy on planet Earth because it is based on the essential concept that I am breathing, therefore I deserve. Capitalism is, in essence, forced altruism, because if I don't give you something that you want, then I will starve. If I don't give you something that you want, then I will starve, because it is based on consent, whereas socialism is based inherently on force.
I think as kind of a millennial conservative, constitutional conservative, one of the biggest threats and one of the hardest things to respond to from people on the left is when they talk about the utopia of the Nordic countries, because they are oftentimes armed with a lot of facts in regards to the efficiency of their public programs and things to that effect. So how would you recommend responding to those claims of the utopianism of the Nordic countries?
Okay, so the first thing that's important to notice about the Nordic countries is that the Nordic countries are, by and large, extraordinarily ethnically homogenous. So they're not comparable and culturally homogenous as well. So Vermont looks a lot like Norway. Right? Bernie Sanders' philosophy works in Vermont and it works in Norway, but it only works for a temporary period of time because Vermont doesn't have its own defense budget, and really neither does Norway. Right? We've been paying for the Nordic countries' defense budgets for a long time. Also, it's worthwhile noting that the taxes in these countries are extraordinarily high, and the countries are going bankrupt anyway. So for about a 15-year period, 20-year period, the Nordic countries have been experiencing extraordinarily slow growth, which has led them to actually elect more right-wing governments on economics and deregulate their economies, because it turns out people don't like paying twice the amount that it costs for a normal car. Right? The income tax rate in places like Denmark for middle-class people, not for upper-class people, for middle-class people is like 60%. So, it's easy for students to say 60% sounds good, but you all go to Yale, which means that eventually you'll have a job that pays you enough that you'll be paying a high percentage of your income in taxes, and it ain't that much fun. There's a reason that Denmark, all these countries are now turning away from this, and they've been living off the back of America paying for their defense budget for a very long time. So you have the privilege of not having to pay your own defense budget. You also have a group of what can best be described as upper education people who have grown up in Western countries with a particular set of values. And socialism, at least in the Nordic way, not full government ownership of resources, but high redistribution of income, that is capable of lasting for a certain period of time, but even there it collapses.
That falls apart under any type of regulations, and socialism regulates everything, it regulates every aspect of that. So the human mind collapses, the ability to reason collapses, and therefore the ability of the individual to take care of himself, to pursue his values, to choose the life that he wants to choose, and to produce in order to facilitate that life, all of that is destroyed. So socialism is evil because it attacks human life. It attacks our reasoning capacity. It attacks our values, our self-interested values, our ability to pursue our own life, and it tells us that we have to sacrifice everything, our life, our wealth, our values, what we enjoy doing, everything for some cause. And depending on the type of socialism, it might be a different cause. The poor, the meek, the proletarian, whatever. And that's just evil. That's just wrong. So if you believe that right is about that which is consistent with human life, that which promotes human life, brings about human flourishing, then you have to reject everything about socialism. Socialism is the opposite. It creates a society which is basically dead. It's dead spiritually, it's dead economically, it's dead from a values pursuit perspective. And if you want to see this, you could have. Not that long ago, socialism was alive and thriving and well. In Eastern Europe and in the Soviet Union, and it was horrible. It was destructive of the human spirit. And when you saw the faces of those young people who tore down the Berlin Wall, you saw what they imagined was possible once they shrugged off socialism, once they dispensed with socialism. So we've had a model, we've seen it, and of course, just in terms of sheer destruction, think about the human lives. Think about the lives lost under Mao or under Stalin. The tens of millions of people that just died.